All right. All right. Peace and blessings to everybody who's going to be watching this in the future. I am here with a brother from my masjid. This is Imam Abu Julanni, and we are going to be having a conversation basically about the impact of Islam on hip hop, what we got right, and how Islam elevated the culture, elevated the art form. And I'm one of those people who's always looking back on the past to see how we can regain those glory days because I felt like hip hop was such a better art form, a more powerful, more constructive art form when it had elements of hip hop.
Uh,
Now, because there's different interpretations of hip hop as we discussed at the Masjid, there's a Nation of Islam, the Nation of Gods and Earths. There's Sunni Islam, there's Shia Islam, but there's a core principle that brings all of these together, a core principle that they all share. And I start off every interview that I've done for this series by asking the question, what is Islam? How do you define it?
Alhamdulillah. All right. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Brother, I want to thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you to all the people who are listening. Thank you for the people who are, questioning and wanting to know basically what we all want to know, what just happened, and then how did it go left?
Mhm.
Because we all know that hip hop has gone left. Hip hop went somewhere else, and it goes. Hip hop literally has phases of the '80s, the '90s, early 2010, 2010s, and then here we are in the 2020, 2024. We're almost in the middle. So we're talking about literally, we are talking about 40, potentially 50 years of hip hop and the development from the jazz movements and the different movements that have influenced and had heavy influence upon hip hop. So we're talking about possibly 60 years of influence and development. So, and then when we asked the question, now the question was, now give me that question again that you asked.
Yes, I was asking, what is Islam? How do you define Islam?
Okay, alhamdulillah. So let's talk about Islam. Alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. So Islam, we're talking about, you know, you know, Islam, we're talking about the Quran. We're talking about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam of 1445 years ago in Arabia. We're talking about Tawheed, which is the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning that we're talking about to worship Allah and only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're talking about the rejection of polytheism in the worship of the human being. We don't worship ourselves. We don't worship other human beings. We don't worship people. We don't worship places, and we don't worship things. We are literally people are worshiping people because when anytime that you are making someone an idol, this is not a joke. This is not a game. You're making someone an idol, which means that you are idolizing someone. To idolize is to make someone an idol. Literally, you are actually, factually, physically, emotionally, mentally worshiping a person. Same thing with a place. You can see a place as a place of that is so holy and divine, and that nothing is greater, and nothing is more than this. It is everything. That place is a special place that's beyond being special. That you're gonna be right in that place and be evil in another place. You are literally worshiping the place and the thing. People can literally be worshiping a thing. For example, if I'm nice to you, having a good time, and I get my car, and all of a sudden you see a change in my personality, I think I'm better than you. You can
Mhm.
never be on my level. I am literally worshiping that thing. People in reality, in truth, throughout the history of man, have worshiped people, places, and things. Islam rejects all of that. Islam is about the singling out Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and worship alone. That no deity is worthy of worship in truth except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this singular form of worship is what's known as Islam, al-Islam. And that we worship only Allah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has many different names and attributes. And and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only Lord because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of everything. So this understanding of Islam, of the submission to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is called Islam. and we acknowledge that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the last and final prophet, that there will be no prophet to come after Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So everyone in our day and time, you know, from the past 1400 years, who said that they are a prophet, we deny, reject, and we refuse the prophethood of these people. And it's so interesting that you talked about that and asked that question, because what is Islam? If you would have asked me that in 1980s when hip hop first came out, I would have definitely told you about um, the 5%er influence. I would have told you about the Nation of Islam influence. Um, I would have told you about whatever that people were calling Islam. The rappers, you know, it's kind of like I'll listen to Dawood Adib, who was he was an African American. He is an African American imam, and he talked about how when we were astray, the work that we did when we were astray, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept the good and our good intentions, even though we did not have the tools to know how to guide people correctly, or we did not know what to call the people to. Because when you talk about the 80s, you're literally talking about 82 through like 89.
Mm-hmm.
You know, hip hop was about, you know, especially with the Islamic influence or what we thought was Islam, that you know, because even we thought that the X clans, many of us thought that was like an Islamic or like a spiritual journey,
Mm-hmm.
and we connected Islam with that journey. But in reality, now that we're older, that was 82, 85. I was like 10 years old in 85.
Mm-hmm.
Today I'm almost 50 years old, and I've taken classes, and I took Shahada, and I know, and inshallah I know more about Islam. But at that time, if you can understand the mentality at that time, that was a source of peace, that was a source of guidance, that was a source of happiness, bro. I really want to express that it was an alternative to Christianity. It was alternative to Protestant Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
It was freedom from the enslavement of the white supremacy, because at that time in the 80s there was so much oppression. There was still oppression, cultural oppression.
Mm-hmm.
And for Black men, this was our chance to see ourselves doing something that excluded white influence. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what it meant. That's what it meant to us.
Mm-hmm.
And as a preteen, this was literally the only time I would see Black males that weren't scripted by white people. Because when the Black men we knew were going to work, they had to act according to their what their job and their boss wanted, and
Yeah.
things of this nature.
You gotta put on that voice.
Yep.
Hey,
Yep.
Mr. Johnson, how's it going?
How's it going, guy? You had to dress in a way that they said was okay, talk the
Yeah.
way they said was okay,
Mm-hmm.
the perfection of the English, and you had to have the language of that environment. So that
Mm-hmm.
there was a lifestyle of the white culture. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Even when you say college was about what? Learning the white culture.
Right.
Even if you said you want to learn business, you had to learn, and see, I'm just talking about how important it is in the influence of lifestyle. That life, and this goes to Islam. That whatever environment you're going into, there is a lifestyle to where you're going. There's a certain mentality, a certain mindset, and Islam it's not a religion. It's a way of life.
Right.
It's a lifestyle. See, that's another thing too. And so hip hop represented getting away from the white lifestyle, the white values,
Mm-hmm.
the whiter you talk, and the way you cut your beard, and imitate, white America, that's what was going on. That's all it was at that time. The education was white dominated, and the knowledge of who Black people were, who Latinos were.
Mm-hmm.
There was literally nowhere to go,
Right.
because even when you say church education, that still was under the white influence,
Yep. Yep.
because the Protestant churches did not give you an opportunity to learn about who you were. The Catholic churches, they never will. Christianity, American Christianity, It's all about the adopting white culture.
Mm-hmm.
So hip hop gave us a chance to take a name that wasn't European. Ice Cube, Ice T,
Mm-hmm.
right? Africa Bambaataa. See,
Mm-hmm.
this was new, different. It was fresh. It was a new and also fashion. You didn't have to dress in a European fashion. Now you got a fashion that white people would not accept,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was ours, and it was hairstyles that was ours, and it was a language that was ours. We use words, yo, B, what's up? This is a
Mm-hmm.
language that's not theirs.
Mm-hmm.
It was a chance for us to to grow and be free and to develop our own thoughts.
Right.
And so it was an opportunity to be free and to be yourself. And so you know, Islam, the Islamic part of it, when Eric B and Rakim, who else? Uh Eric B and Rakim,
Lord, like
the
the
different
brand Nubian.
brand Nubian, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? They were talking about a knowledge in a circle of knowledge that was totally excluded to what we were part of.
Mm-hmm.
That's what attracted us, man.
Right.
You see what I'm
Right.
saying? It was the identity crisis. It was a solution to the identity crisis, which we still are in today.
Right.
You know, as African Americans, we're still in the identity crisis, even in 2024. We're in identity crisis. Is a sexual crisis going on now to where Americans don't know the males from the females.
Mm-hmm.
We have something called nouns. You know these nouns in the
Pronouns, yeah.
80s. Pronouns. What's going on? Who's working on our brains to make us even two men like you and I? Why would I ask you, brother, what is your pronoun? Like why? See, this type of thinking, this
Yeah,
stuff in an
yeah.
old school world, we never heard of no stuff like this, man.
Nothing. Nothing like that.
So when I was young and a preteen, and I needed a way out and a way to get away from white supremacy and get away from racism and black inferiority because it creates an inferiority complex. You know what I did? I played my music and I got into my music.
Mm-hmm.
The music was called hip hop. It was a hip hop movement. It
Mm-hmm.
literally, hip hop was a movement. It was what I was doing in my mom's basement or what I was doing in my bedroom when I closed the door
Mm-hmm.
and I was listening to my music. It was a movement and I was into it. My friends at high school, they were into it and we were all moved together and we moved in the same direction.
Right, right, right. Well, let me hop in real quick because I wanted to ask you because one of the things that always fascinated me about you is the fact that you always on fire for Islam. You love Islam.
Alhamdulillah.
So
Alhamdulillah.
I want to know what's your story? How'd you get into Islam? Did you begin as a 5%er and then convert to Sunni or tell me your story?
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Okay, so I'm originally from Harvey, Illinois, which is right on the south side of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And I come out of the Baptist church. And at that time, in the Baptist church, brother, I was content,
Mm-hmm.
happy.
Mm-hmm.
I was home. It's all I knew. My dad, he was from Alabama. His name was Evans Moore. He's from Alabama. And my mom was from Robbins, Illinois, a
Mm-hmm.
small black town, small black suburb of Chicago. And so, hey, man, I was just doing my thing. You know what I'm saying? There was a lot of at the time growing up in the '80s, like we're talking about the '80s and the hip hop era in the '80s. That's when you gotta remember that's when the crack came in,
Right.
and that's when and see another thing too. See, when we talk about movements, that's when the gangster movement started.
Okay.
So, but see, this is the beginning eras when people literally start beginning to start getting into different things and stuff like that. So my I knew my thing wasn't sports. I knew my thing wasn't all these different things. I love sports. I enjoy sports, but I didn't love it. So my thing was, man, I love faith. I love faith. So at that time, up until high school, so Baptist church up until high school. When I moved to DC, me and my father, my mother, my sister, we all moved to Washington D.C. We moved to Southeast D.C.
Mm-hmm.
So my dad said, he made it clear, you couldn't pick your homeboys in Chicago because you all grew up together, but now's the opportunity for you to kind of be yourself, learn yourself, and see what you want to get into. So at the time I was going to a Baptist church. It's my foundation at the time. But let's see, in the beginning, I know what it was. So one day I was walking and I saw, okay, no, it was two parts. It's two parts of the story. So I bought a Quran from a Muslim bookstore.
Now,
And
what made you do that as a Baptist?
because where did Islam? So okay, when I was coming up as a kid, there was a Muslim, it was one Muslim guy. I literally did not know who Muhammad was or anything of that nature. So, but when I moved to Chicago, I started noticing once again. I think that it all started with the autobiography of Malcolm X. Autobiography of Malcolm X.
Gotcha.
And when I saw his transition from his entire life story from the black nationalism, then his father was killed, and then he went to jail, then he went to the Nation of Islam, and then he left it, the Nation of Islam, and came to Islam. And to see, and I just it opened something, it opened a light. Malcolm X has always been a great inspiration for me. And when people talk about, I stand on the backs of so and so and so and so, I literally stand, I'm sorry, shoulders. I literally stand on the shoulders of Malcolm X. Like, he inspired me totally 100%. Me learning about Malcolm X was the beginning of me, not only Islam, but my the knowledge of self and knowledge of who I am. So I bought a Quran. I had fell in love with this Quran, man. I can't even explain it. Truly, Allah makes Muslims. And it got to a point, I loved this Quran so much, I would take it to school with me.
Right.
This was in high school. And also, I would take it to Baptist to church with me. So I would be at church, and some people would look at me like, why are you bringing that here? Like, that, it doesn't even make sense. But the church that I went, Baptist churches are a great place of development for some people. Like, it was a great place of development for me, because I knew so a few Muslims that came through the masjid, and also I knew Baptist people, but also knew the black spiritualists as well. I wasn't comfortable with the Europeans, Eurocentric mentality of Europe, of the Baptist religion. I didn't like the history of how pretty much our oppressors were all, Protestants. So then I looked into the African spirituality, but immediately I was never down with the polytheism. You know what I mean? So whenever they would talk about the clothes, I was in. You want to dance? I was in. Songs? I was in. But when you would start talking about the worship of deities and things like that, the Yoruba, and, the Haitians, I couldn't. But hoodoo, because there was hoodoos, African American hoodoo. We have to also understand that part of African American tradition was hoodoo,
right?
Which is that the African American version of voodoo. And I was never with that. Like, it's something in me. My dad would always instill in me that there's only one God. He was my dad was more of like a Unitarian. He was kind of trained Unitarian, and they believed there's only one God. So I was like, nah, I can't get with I'm not with the African spiritualist. I'm not really feeling the Protestant. So naturally, I kind of gravitated towards Islam. And I'm telling you, I can't explain it, but it was just like, to this day, people say, like, why did you, how did you become Muslim? Why did you become Muslim? And I'm telling you, I have never answered that question. I really don't know. I really don't know. It's just that, like, I read that Quran, and brother, it just captured my heart. I fell in love with the Quran. And I remember there was a time, brother, that I literally knew so little about Islam, that I knew about the Quran, but didn't know Hadith, didn't know about Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, never really knew Muslims, and I didn't hang with Muslims or anything. I just was a Baptist kid who loved the Quran. And over time, development and things like this, and taking classes, and I learned about going to the masjid. I learned how to pray properly. I can tell you about times like that I was just truly, truly, really ignorant. You know what I mean? Just and when I say ignorant, you just didn't know. You just didn't know.
Right.
which is why I never beat anybody down who doesn't know you're in a bad situation. I mean, there's a way out of it. You know what I'm saying? But we got to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Right.
And I know that, and see me, I used the Quran in my life when I had family problems, when I had problems in the streets. And you got to remember the time we're talking like uh end of the end of the 80, the end of the 80s going into like 90, 93, 95. I graduated high school in 93, and people were literally like becoming crackheads, and crack was coming in, and all of a sudden violence and families were falling apart, and my friends were becoming drug dealers, and then people started dying and all this stuff like this. Man, I just kept reading the Quran in high school. I just kept reading it. So at Belusi in high school, man, I did something that was never seen before, and it was kind of amazed people. That in my senior year, I had my grandmother. She made me a thobe. So I went
Okay.
to school. I went to school with a thobe, and I had my Quran. So one of the guys came to me. He's like, "Man, why aren't you Muslim?" He was like, "Why?" He's like, and he literally stopped me. He was like, "Why aren't you Muslim?" Because he's like, "You're going to the Baptist church, but everyone can see that your heart is attached to the Quran." I didn't even know. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just, man, I just loved it so much. I'm gonna tell you how. Let me tell you a funny story. Let me tell you where I was, and how, like I say, I didn't know any Muslims. Did never been to a masjid in my whole life. So one day, I had to talk to a Muslim. I had to talk to him. I just had to, because I didn't understand the code of reading the Quran. Now, let me explain what I mean. I couldn't get it. I would read one page, but and when I got to the bottom of the page, it didn't go to the next page. I was like, "So how do you read it?" I was like, "Because am I reading out of sequence?" He said, "Brother, look." He took the book, he turned it over. I had been reading it backwards. He said, okay. He said, so in Islam, the Quran goes right to, right, goes right to left. English we read from, what I mean? So the right. I was like, brother, brother, I didn't know. Like I thought you had to read it. I thought you had to read the Quran by page and then jump to another page and I didn't know what it was. Like I was literally that ignorant, brother.
Wow.
I give you another one. I gave you another one, because I'll be like, it's all about learning.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I was married and I lived in Silver Spring. And once again, now this by this time I was college age, and this when I began to go. I had begun to go to the masjid, but I didn't take classes yet. I was learning about the prayer and stuff like that. So and now this time I know how to pray. So I got married, and then so I'm at home in my brand new apartment and everything with my wife, my brand new wife, loving life. And so she said, "Call the adhan." I said, "Okay." So I go in the living room and I called the adhan, and then I sat down. Brother, I didn't know who was supposed to lead the prayer, because at that time I would
You
just
so
go to the
new.
masjid,
Yeah.
sit down, and wait for somebody to lead the prayer. Like and I'm telling you something. I didn't know enough Quran to even lead my own wife in salah. I was always the follower who prayed. You know what I'm saying? And then alhamdulillah, by Allah's grace, brother, I took classes and I learned, and my journey of life. And then one day, what this was about, this was a while back. This was about maybe 15 years ago. I was the imam of a group of Muslims, you know, and it was amazing. And all of it, in every step I took, I was always trying to learn. I was always trying to learn and work on my ignorance. Alhamdulillah.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
So going back to your days in Chicago, you said you moved to DC when you were like what, 13, you said 13,
So
14?
I was about yeah, about 13, 14. Yep, 13, 14 years old. And
Okay.
basically I started my ninth grade high school in Southeast DC.
Okay, gotcha. Now
Yeah.
you were saying that in the 80s in Chicago, that's when you first started to see gang stuff develop. Now we see
Yeah.
the gang stuff is like terrorism out there now.
Yeah,
What
because
were you seeing in the early stages of it?
that's a good question, brother. So in Chicago, Okay, here's how Chicago I'm sure it works the same way, but it worked the same. It was this the way it was in the 80s. So the gangs were based on streets and
Right.
blocks.
Mm-hmm.
So here you are, a young child, you may be, 7 years old, and you live on a block. Whether you were living with your mother, only single family home, which I was at the time, but then later my father remarried my mother and we moved to DC. But at that time, I lived on a street called Artesian. And Artesian was known, there was a lot of guys who were in the Gangster Disciples. So I was associated with Gangster Disciples.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? So you end up getting sucked into a lifestyle and a culture, whether you want to be or not. So when people ask you where if you're out of town, people ask you where you from, and you're gonna say, naturally I'm from Harvey, Illinois. And then it gets to more detail. What street you're from. I say Artesian. They associate me with GDs, and it's either going to be love or it's going to be hate.
Right. Right.
But it's interesting you ask the question because literally, when I was young in the early 80s, let's say 82, 83, the gangs were beginning to come in to the community. At that time, there was like literally, brother, I'm not playing, one or two. There was literally one or two.
Mm-hmm.
But then, and most of the people were just Christians. They were just Protestants going to church. So there was lots of churches, and then there was like a one or two bad kids. We call them bad kids.
Right.
One
Right.
or two, one or two
That's what
bad
we called them when
kids.
I was little too. Yeah.
and so, but what happened was, and I'm gonna fast forward, but then I'll give you the more detail. By the time I got it out of there in '89, the teen youth culture had been consumed with gangs.
Wow.
And I'm talking about there was literally organizations and all teenagers, I keep, and remember, the gangster movement was new in that time. There was no old gangsters.
Mm-hmm.
There were no old men. There were gangsters in the early 80s, because you got to remember, they literally started in the 70s. Okay. By that time, is in some places, it was in the city in Chicago, it was roughly about 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And Harvey, it was literally 1 or 2 years old. Nobody knew what it was. Nobody knew any of this stuff. You know what I mean? And so it was the youth culture in the city, in a
Mm-hmm.
small suburb of Chicago, and it grew like wildfire. And
Right.
and then all kind of crazy child delinquency, child deviation, children using drugs, violence went through the roof. We didn't know what violence was until this thing came around.
Mm-hmm.
Because literally some of the gang initiations involve stealing and violence and things like that. You're talking about goofy little Christian kids.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Whose parents, if the parents knew they were gonna get a beat down,
Mm-hmm.
that they didn't know that when the kids were playing after school, that they were joining these gangs and that they were doing things and breaking in houses, breaking in cars, stealing people's stuff, practicing a lot of evil. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And then so in other words, that they started out in 83, 84. Now here we talking, if you're talking 3 years later, 3 years experience in the gangs, people go to jail, they come out. The families are upside down now because the mother and father who raised the child to be a doctor, now the child is in jail.
Mm-hmm.
Then came the homosexuality because now some of the guys got raped, the
Oh
girls got
wow.
raped.
Damn.
Yeah, it was bad, man. I mean, it was just a total destruction of the human character.
Wow.
A lot of people got destroyed
Mm-hmm.
off of this way of life,
Right.
off of this movement. And then it's always see, that's why, like when I see these rappers today and they're glorifying it, yeah, you got it on the surface showing your cars, you're calling to it, but the reality is that it spreads a lot of evil, and it destroyed a lot of families, a lot of men, and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of women. A lot of women became sexually active. It became immoral. We're
Right.
talking about immorality. You're talking about massive immorality, like literally young girls raised in a Christian home who were literally virgins, would go hang out with her friends and get drunk and smoke weed. They would have sex with the guys, and then it
Mm-hmm.
became a routine.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody would pop up pregnant. The girls would became juvenile delinquent. The guys became juvenile delinquent, and it just became a monster. It
Right.
became a monster.
Man.
And that's why me, I stand firmly against the gangster movement. I don't play with that. I'm not your friend. It is Jahiliyyah, but it's my Jahiliyyah. It's the Jahiliyyah that I came out of. And when my dad came back, he literally, as I began to go astray, me and my sister began to go astray. My dad, he came in and he saved us. He came, he saw what's going on. He said, "We getting out of here."
Right.
That's why I always encourage everybody. You got for self-development, you got to get away from your hometown.
Right.
You gotta get away from your hometown, man, because see, you can't help the culture you were born in. It literally becomes automatic.
Mm-hmm.
As crazy as that sounds, it's automatic. It's automatic. Go, like if you're from DC, go is automatic. That's all you know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in Chicago, house music came before. Oh no, they came they came around the same time. House music and house music and then hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
But then hip hop became gangster rap. And when gangster rap literally became the theme music to gangster lifestyle,
Right.
they literally gave a theme music to a movement. But what people don't know too is that house music, which is originally from Chicago, which was a children's. This was our teen lifestyle, teen culture of Chicago, and when you live in the suburbs, you go to the city because you are attracted to everything, blah blah blah. You're attracted to big city, big lights, and the people literally they put the gay agenda in the music, and it was called hip hop. I'm sorry, it was called house music. The same way that they put the gangster movement in hip hop, and people tried these different things, and it led them straight to destruction.
Wow.
And by the time I left Harvey in '89, by the time I left the Chicago area in '89, man, that place, I mean, people no longer had goals of being doctors. The kids no longer want to be doctors. Everybody wanted to be gangsters. Everybody wanted to be, I mean, it was like, I can't imagine being a parent, back then. It was just the horrors of what happened. And then to watch, and then I moved to DC. DC had, it's okay. So Harvey and Chicago didn't have the crack problem at the time because the drug lords didn't let crack into the city. Later on, they did, but in '89, they wouldn't let the crack into the city because they would Chicago just a heroin place, heroin, weed, stuff like that, alcohol.
Yeah. Hold on 1 second, brother. I'm Julanni. Because like I was saying before, they time me when I'm recording it. So let me stop it and we're gonna hop right back in. So that way it won't be interrupt you. All right.
Yep. All right, Assalamu alaikum.